ختم اشغال کرتی ہر خوان نو بہار شاہ فتح دا وطن مبارک ہزار وار شاہ دغا آزادی میں دا افغان تنا بہار شاہ شاہ مبارک نو استقلال سوچ منتس کو پوری پخپل و خوار و زار شاہ فتح دا وطن مبارک پا ہزار وار شاہ
برادران خیلی ها محترم ما برای همه که دعوت بکنیم که این عفو امیرالمؤمنین استفاده بکنن هیچ تخصیصی وجود نداره جنرال، وزیر، رئیس پارلمان، رئیس مصالحه ملی، وزیر هر کسی که باشه بیایم به دروازه های باز حمایت اسلامی با هم متحد شویم یک کشور آباد بسازیم دیگر در کنج و کنار افغانستان و توسط پول و پیسه و دشمنی نظام و پای ساخته شویم.
نعره تکبیر! الله اکبر!
بیا خاص که ډېر د خوشحالۍ احساس موږ چې کولو هغه شپه کله چې وروستی امریکایي له کابل نه ووته نو خدای پاک دې وکړي چې دلته نور صلح امنیت او ارامي راشي او جګړې او بدبختۍ دغه له منځه لاړ شي ځکه افغانان د څلوېښت کاله ډېر ودردېدل ډېر وځورېدل ډېر ستونزو سره مخ شول.
These Taliban fighters were not what many involved in the conflict in Afghanistan wanted or expected to see and hear. But as the Taliban returned in August 2021, the Afghanistan that had been built with Western support collapsed like a house of cards. Over 176,000 people were killed during 20 years of war at a cost of $2.3 trillion.
When you sum the human cost of this, it can only be described as a tragedy. There are plenty of lessons to learn. The question is, are we actually going to do the learning?
La question c'est, est-ce que les soldats français qui ont combattu en Afghanistan, ceux qui sont morts, ceux qui ont été blessés, est-ce que ce fut un combat pour rien? C'est ça la question.
The Taliban regained control of Afghanistan on the 15th of August 2021. Few of the younger fighters had ever seen the capital, Kabul. The veterans, however, returned to their old command posts and memories. To genuinely understand what happened here, you have to go back 30 years to the events that led to the emergence of the Taliban in the first place.
علت و سبب یک جا شدن ما در به همراه طالبان وطن ناآرامی بود جنگای داخلی در بینشان شروع بود با ما وقت میسر نمیشد که اونجا بریم زندگی آرام کنیم چون که مشکلات ها خیلی زیاد بود اونجا احساس امنیت نبود
When this violence erupted in the early 90s, the West looked the other way. Some video has survived, captured by a handful of dedicated journalists. By 1992, many different Afghan factions were vying for power. These men were originally armed by the United States and were once heroes for ousting the Soviet invaders, but now they turned on each other. After the 1989 Soviet retreat, they unleashed chaos on the capital, Kabul.
I was born in Kabul. I was deeply, deeply, deeply hurt. I can still feel that memory. It was a ghost town. After 4 o'clock in the afternoon, dogs were roaming, dogs who were used to eat human bodies, flesh. People were walking like ghosts, walking skeletons. You could see very little life in their eyes or in their features.
Two years of internal fighting and killing were not easily forgotten. The rival leaders were Ahmad Shah Massoud, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdul Rashid Dostum, Ismail Khan, and Abdul Rasul Sayaf. Whether they were commanders, religious or party leaders, or tribal chiefs, they all became known as the warlords, for very good reasons. Women became spoils of war.
اختطاف و تجاوز و ازدواج اجباری اینا به نهایت زیاد بود. نوید شهیدم دمکرارویان بود، ما دمکرارویان سه بودم و هم دمکرارویان سه بود. وقتی که یک گروپ رفتن که تجاوز کنن این امرای خود ببرن، ما از مادر کلانش امر کرد که خود از تراس برده و این دختر از 6 منزل از تراس خود انداخت و یک مدت طولانی حتی 2 شب و 2 روز در سر سرک ماند. کس جرأت برداشتن از او را نمیکرد از ترس. یک تعداد زیاد دخترای ما حتی یک نسل ما گفتم میتونم قربانی این خشونت ها شدن.
In the south of Afghanistan, a whole raft of minor tribal chiefs, now forgotten, flattened Kandahar and its surrounding areas. It was from this state of chaos that the Taliban was born. By 1994, they'd begun to emerge from their religious schools, determined to re-establish order and the rule of law. These early images don't really reflect the scale of the movement. It quickly grew in numbers in the countryside and refugee camps in neighboring Pakistan, a legacy of the previous war with the Soviet Union.
زه تحصیل په دوران کې هم علم مې کاوه د خپلو استادانو مشرانو د خپل دا اقدام زموږ وشو یعنې خپل د مظلوم ولس چې مظلومیت کې و مظلومیت ظلم دې هم ته ورسېده چې ناسته موږ ته نور په هېڅ قانون کې جواز نه درلوده. زموږ امیرالمؤمنین رحمه الله ملا محمد عمر مجاهد رحمه الله د هغې په قیادت کې کنه موږ خپل دیني خپل مشغولتیا کوله.
The Taliban swept across most of the country, but in doing so, it inherited a notorious guest, Osama bin Laden, the Saudi leader of the armed group Al-Qaeda. What's often left out of this story is the fact that bin Laden and Al-Qaeda weren't invited in by the Taliban, but by the warlords of East Afghanistan, long before the Taliban seized power. In 1996, the Taliban took Kabul, and Al-Qaeda pledged allegiance to them. Afghans saw them as saving them from the very warlords who'd once been their allies.
The people of this country were happy that they were gone. They were cleaned up by the Taliban for the right reasons. Not everything the Taliban did were bad. I will tell you this as an Afghan, as a human being. Not everything they did was bad.
جنگ از شهرها به دور رفت و طالب‌ها واقعیتش این بود که تجاوز، مخصوصا تجاوزات جنسی، ازدواج اجباری، اختطاف و اینی کارا از شانه زنها دور شد و صورت نمی گرفت. برعکس
The Taliban imposed a puritanical, moralistic order condemned by much of the Western world. Women vanished from public life, excluded from employment and education. The outside world saw these images largely out of context, without understanding that this was the price of peace. For Afghans from the cities, it was also a shock. After 15 years of Soviet occupation, followed by civil war, they now faced strict Islamic law imposed by their own countrymen.
The Taliban Islamic movement was a traditional people. They couldn't bring something new in this country. What they were talking about, the Islamic Sharia, Islamic law, existed in this country in more than 1,000 years, because Afghanistan couldn't become the colony of any empire. So Afghanistan didn't experience any British law or French laws or Italian laws or any others.
The Taliban ruled Afghanistan with an iron fist for 5 years. But then everything changed on the other side of the world. On the 11th of September 2001, Al-Qaeda attacked America on its own soil. The US was gripped by shock, incomprehension, and a thirst for revenge.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Osama bin Laden and his group of Al-Qaeda followers were based in Afghanistan. The White House, however, refused to negotiate with the Taliban. It chose to link the Afghan regime to Al-Qaeda, despite dissenting voices at home.
In the intelligence community, there was a lot of discussion at that initial moment. Should we target the Taliban? All right? And there were people at that time that said we should not, because the information we had was that yes, the Taliban played host to Al-Qaeda, but they really didn't know about 9/11. Not Afghanistan. There's not a single Afghan, not a single Taliban was in that terrorist act.
The United States military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime in Afghanistan.
In October 2001, the US planned to strike hard and fast. It launched airstrikes aimed at destroying Al-Qaeda and toppling the Taliban regime. However, the US did not yet commit ground troops to Afghanistan. Instead, the CIA turned to the warlords, the same warring rivals who'd torn the country apart just 6 years earlier.
When the Americans showed up, you had these resentful warlords, okay? And when we said, we'll give you weapons, you can reconstitute your warlord armies, they instantly said, yes, we will do whatever you want. Just let us be warlords again.
The CIA called me and they said, this is going to bring a very bright future for Afghanistan. We are going to come there in a massive way to defeat the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. You are enemies. And they came. The biggest army in the world, the biggest economy in the world, comes to me and says, what shall I do? It's like all of a sudden, all of us become a Spider-Man. Right?
طالبان
تنها از ولایات شمال و غرب افغانستان و مرکز افغانستان عقب نشینی کرده بود، به طرف جنوب و شرق و جنوب غرب وجود داشتند. قویی که بتواند طالبان تعقیب کنه و یا خلصلا کنه وجود نداشت. این برای مجاهدین در روز زمان خوشایند بود.
The warlords reclaimed half of Afghanistan in less than 2 months. They exacted their revenge on the Taliban with American support. Away from the cameras and the public eye, thousands of prisoners were murdered. Only these still photographs remain, taken at Dasht-e-Leli in the northern desert. These Taliban prisoners were asphyxiated in containers in November 2001. Others were sent to secret prisons or to the US detention center at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba.
The justification for going into Afghanistan was 9/11. It wasn't about moral values. It wasn't about saving Afghan women. Afghan women had been persecuted for years and we did nothing. I was trying to have a friendly government. It's a system with which we're familiar. We did it extremely quickly.
The President of the United States.
In December 2001, a provisional Afghan government was formed under a United Nations mandate. This was now 3 weeks after the capture of Kabul. The south of Afghanistan, however, remained under Taliban control. In Washington, Congress celebrated the new partnership between the warlords and the West.
America and Afghanistan are now allies against terror. We'll be partners in rebuilding that country. And this evening, we welcomed the distinguished interim leader of a liberated Afghanistan, Chairman Hamid Karzai.
Hamid Karzai was selected by the United States and was from the Pashtun ethnic group in southern Afghanistan, the same as the Taliban. On the day of his appointment, he accepted their surrender. The next day, the 6th of December 2001, a Taliban spokesman held a press conference.
Both sides, Hamid Karzai and Taliban authorities agreed to surrender Kandahar for the welfare of people. Mullah Muhammad Umar agreed to surrender the power to them. They should tried to save the life and the dignity of Mullah Muhammad Umar. We are ready to negotiate. We are ready to cooperate. We are ready to resolve this problem through logic way. But unfortunately, they were not listening.
So what happened? Like a day after, or a couple of days after, I don't know the exact sequence, Rumsfeld made a speech specifically abrogating that peace agreement.
I do not think there'll be a negotiated end to the situation that's unacceptable to the United States.
That's unacceptable. Okay, that's...
C'est ce que j'appelle, moi, la faute originelle. Mais ces gens-là contrôlaient 90% du territoire afghan. Où sont-ils allés? Ils n'ont signé de reddition à personne. Je crois aujourd'hui que si nous nous étions posé cette question sérieusement, la réponse aurait été que ces gens-là sont ici et qu'il faut leur parler, qu'ils représentent quelque chose et que peut-être ils pourront faire partie du consensus national.
A huge majority of the Taliban fled, seeking refuge in rural areas or making their way to the sprawling refugee camps in neighboring countries.
Now, تولد مې چې دی په د مهاجرت په وخت کې کله چې په افغانستان باندې بیا حمله وسوله موږ هم لاړلو ډېر خلک لاړو بیا کله 4-5 کاله مخکې په پاکستان کې حالات سخت شول یعنی مهاجرینو باندې پابندي ولګېده شخصا موږ به یې ځورولو کله به چې ښار ته راتللو یو چک پاینټ باندې عادي پولیس موږ نه 200-300 روپۍ اخیستلې او بغیر له دې نه په ښه سترګه نه راته کتل کېدل پاکستان کې.
I, like most Americans at the time, I think, thought that the Taliban had been so thoroughly beaten, so quickly and easily overcome, and had fled so quickly that they were discredited and couldn't come back. Our priority then was Al-Qaeda.
Now there were Western troops on the ground. 10,000 American soldiers and their allies were hunting Al-Qaeda, which had disappeared into the Afghan mountains. At this moment, the White House chose to escalate the invasion. The UN approved the formation of the most hybrid military coalition in history. By 2002, 20 countries had sent 5,000 soldiers to Kabul. In 2004, the international community set up and financed the first fully democratic presidential election of the new era.
We're at a point where we clearly have moved from major combat activity to a period of stability and stabilization and reconstruction, and the bulk of this country today, it's secure. We see people returning to their country from all across the globe in large numbers.
Je suis revenue après 20 ans en Afghanistan. J'avais 28 ans exactement. On part de zéro, il y a tout à faire en Afghanistan. Tout est à reconstruire, le pays, les bâtiments, les routes, l'électricité, que ce soit l'éducation, la santé, et tout était à refaire, tout était à construire. Et très vite aussi, j'ai réalisé que les médias étaient à construire. En 2004, lorsque j'ai monté ma boîte de production, on a dû travailler sur les élections et la communication autour des élections. Donc, produire du contenu, des spots, télé, radio, pour convaincre les gens de participer aux élections.
هموطنان عزیز، من حامد کرزی کاندید ریاست جمهوری آینده افغانستان.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. این جانب دکتر مسعود جلال کاندیدای ریاست جمهوری اسلامی افغانستان و من الله توفیق.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم. اسم ما عبدالرشید دوستم است، یکی از کاندیدهای مستقل ریاست جمهوری آینده.
Tout à coup, c'est la première fois qu'on nous demandait notre avis pour élire notre président, notre leader. J'ai été accompagnée de mon grand-père, qui est un homme âgé de 90 ans, qui n'avait jamais participé à une élection de sa vie. Donc j'ai voulu partager ce moment avec lui. C'était d'autant plus émouvant de nous rendre à deux et de faire la queue et de voter. Et j'admets que j'ai pleuré. J'ai vraiment beaucoup pleuré le jour où j'ai mis mon bulletin dans l'urne. Et je suis sortie avec les yeux remplis de larmes, comme beaucoup de gens d'ailleurs.
که زیر پانتون فارغ شدم بیا کار شروع کنم.
بازغم هم خو هغه کولو انګلیسي کې ډېر ښه ومه نو کار شروع سو د خلکو لپاره ورځ $200 هغه د ترجمان هغه عاید و دا ډېرې پیسې وې د هغه لپاره د خلکو د اقتصادي لحاظه ډېر زر هغه سول په وظیفو سول او کارونه زیات سول تر هغې پورې چې ترجماني کارونه و بیا ساختمانی کارونه شروع سول ورو پورو خلک په ساختمانی چارو باخت شول انجوګانې راغلې جامع جهانی شعبات خلاص سول سفارتخانې خلاصې سوې نو خلکو ته یو وارې د کاري زمینې مساعده سوې هغه خلک چې مستعده ورته و هغه د زر په کارو ولګېدل
It was just a good time. It was a happy time. Like in our lifetime, it was always a dream to have a flag. So you know, human beings they need symbols. They need things that uplifts them, that gives them moral, that gives them encouragement. So yes, the flag, the national army, the national police. The women's colleges, the girls going to school, women's rights to work. There was hope and there was a bright future.
In the rural areas, however, development was very slow. Nothing really changed. Destitution was still widespread. All that ordinary Afghans can remember from this time is uniforms and weapons.
ولې نه بیرېدلو پر موږ یې تکلیفونه تېر کړي وه پر موږ یې خوارۍ تېرې کړي وې نو ولې نه بیرېدلو خفه وو نو خو تکلیفو ته موږ ولاړو خواریو ته موږ ولاړو ولې خوشحاله وو خفه وو موږ ته یې تاوانونه رسوله خو موږ ته یې تکلیفونه راکوله ډېر وخت کېږي لږ وخت نه کېږي
In 2004, the Taliban leaders made one final offer of surrender to President Hamid Karzai, but it was ignored. So, in the secrecy of abandoned rural areas, in the refugee camps, and in their base in Pakistan, they took up arms again. In 2006, they allowed a few Western journalists to film them.
په دوامه دوره کې چې موږ کوم مبارزه شوې ده کوم جهاد فی سبیل الله شوی هغه هم په موږ راتپل شوی جنګ دی موږ د چا کور ته نه یو تلي موږ باندې چا د خپلې خوارې و دا خامه جونګړې نه دي دا هم چا موږ باندې پیرزو نه وي او دا زموږ مسلم حق و چې خپل د کور نه باید دفاع کړی وی خپل د مظلوم ولس نه باید دفاع کړی وی نو هغه الحمدلله وشول
أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله
موږ سره د وسایلو کمی و اسباب موږ سره نه و او موږ سره نور مصارف نه برابرېدل خو چونکې یو عبادت په نیت موږ شروع کړی و د مادیاتو په نیت باندې موږ نه وو او نه د سهولت په غم کې موږ وو او نه بل څه نظر کې وو
یکی مردم از ما مردم شد ملت از طرفداری ما شد ملت هر نوع همکاری و امکانات با ما برابر میکردن تمام مهمات و سلاح و وسایل ما از طرف مردم تأمین میشد و بالاخره ولسوالی ها و قریه ها همه به دست ما مردم افتاد.
په طالبانو کې وه ولې نه بیرېدې خو په وینو مور سره ژړ بغارې و چې غارې مو ولې کوچنیان مو پرې مښتې و خو تر کالو یې کشوله خو بابا چیرې نو دا یې زړه کېدله چې دوی بیا پلاره سي مور بیا زویه سي خور بیا وروره سي نو ولې نه ژړله پسې
منګه دا جهاد چې شروع کړو نو په دې نیت موږ نه و چې موږ به ژوندي پاتې کیږو نو منګه دا شهادت په ځان منلی و چې شهادت سړی په ځان ومني نو بیا یې هم سړي کې نور نه پاتې کیږي چې یره پکې سړي کې نه وي نو دا ټول کارونه بیا اسانه وي
The US troops were not prepared for a guerrilla war. Danger lurked at every turn.
I figured it was going to be a fairly easy mission. I figured it was settled, it was done. Essentially what we were doing there is just basically biding time until we could figure out a way to continue our effort against Al-Qaeda. That's what I thought. And the reality when I got on the ground was completely different. I'd come to find that there was still a shooting war in Afghanistan going on. And despite the White House portrayal otherwise, it was still a war going on.
The security situation in Afghanistan was declining. Taliban gains were extraordinarily worrisome. It began a very significant, noticeable decline in 2007. So there was no question, I think, that additional combat power from NATO and the United States would be necessary to reverse the Taliban momentum.
Taliban and Al-Qaeda are preparing to launch new attacks. Our strategy is not to be on the defense, but to go on the offense. The alliance was founded on this principle. An attack on one is an attack on all.
Vous venez de décider de renforts français en Afghanistan.
On va quand même pas laisser revenir ces moyenâgeux qui mettaient la burqa avec juste une petite fenêtre assez malheureuse.
Vous disiez il y a un an, pendant la campagne,
oui,
vous disiez aucune armée étrangère dans toute l'histoire du monde n'a réussi à gagner une guerre.
Mais sauf que c'est pas une guerre là, puisque nous sommes aux côtés des Afghans.
In just 2 years, the number of American and Western soldiers doubled. By 2008, 60,000 troops from 40 different countries were on the ground in Afghanistan. But the more troops that were deployed, the fiercer the Taliban resistance.
جنگ ساحه پراقه وه یقینا هغه جنګ هم چې و داسې اطرافي جنګ و فرانسویانو ته هم پکې ضربه او تلفات اوښتي وو موږ هره پیشقدمي چې وه موږ دپاره ډېر اهمیت ځکه درلودو چې موږ به هم ګزار کوو موږ هم پرې ګزار کوو چې موږ دښمن وو دا حقیقت دی.
The Taliban were more effective than I think people would have been led to believe. It's like, you know, these guys are reconstituting and they're being effective in a reconstitution. In most instances, the way we were trained, and my interpretation was they were a very close, intermeshed ally of al-Qaeda. Essentially, they were nearly the same. I've come to find, in retrospect, that's not true. The Taliban are much more akin to, if you will, the French resistance of World War II in many ways, because they are a regional entity. They consist of the Pashtun.
Today, the landscape of southern Afghanistan is peppered with open wounds. Nothing was spared, not even schools. These are the battle scars of the destruction wrought on the people and the land, caught in the crossfire of this almighty power struggle.
و په دغه کمربند کې عظمت را باندې تېر کړی شان یې په لاس نه راکولول چې موږ وروسته چې شان دې په سر کې داسې کورونه بمبار شي ویستلو په زوره به یې د کورو ویستلو شان به ماوار ور پاته شول هېڅ یې په لاس نه راکوئ پخ کړي دیګونه دسترخوان به مو ډک پاته شو ځینې وبه وتلو په زوره به یې د سرای ویستلو ول ووځئ چې سرای موږ ونیسي سرای به دوی ونیو هغه به تیارۍ رالې بمبار به یې پرې ورکړئ سرایونه به مو بمبار شول بد ویرېدلو نو خو چې د تیارۍ ګور به مو واورېده ادارې مو پر مځکه چاودلې ځغاستله به کوچنیان مومنان به چغې ولې ځغاستل به کور ته به په یو تاخچو کې پټېدله کښېنستله به چې تیاره به را د شپې به د خوبه پراته وو تیاره به راباندې راله څپلۍ به مو سر تېر شي سره په هوا کېدلو به ننوتلو به په کنجانو کې به درېدلو په تاخچو کې به پټېدلو
اسلامی جمهوریت به جمهور رئیس جناب اقبال حامد کرزی
Triumphant images from the cities like these were misleading and covered up the other war, the one for power. The warlords had secured influence through massive electoral fraud. Cronyism ran through the whole system. Parliament became a symbol of the country itself, divided.
It was a composition of warlords, drug lords, corrupt people, good people, technocrats, communists, left, right, middle of the road, all kinds of people, populists. Some crooks and criminals saw that. They said, oh, this will make us a lot of money. Some of us made a lot of money. Some of my colleagues, even in that parliament, made a lot of money. So corruption saw a window there. The political mafia was being created by the economic mafia.
Quick and easy money came from drugs. Banned by the Taliban, poppy production now skyrocketed. The urban landscape in Kabul began to change. By 2007, poppy palaces, examples of narco-architecture, started to spring up. In the shadows, the impact of drugs was devastating. Afghanistan became the world's leading producer of opium and heroin.
At the beginning, there was a kind of, how would you say it, a tolerance. I mean, those issues will be dealt with later. Let's put a rule of law in place, let's put a development in place, let's build a government capacity up, and the counter narcotics will fall in place by itself nearly automatically. Now, that was a miscalculation. That's not how it works. I mean, those warlords, they extract rents from the most vulnerable, and they fight each other to get to those rents, to those profits, to those gains. That means that they are becoming part of the instability. The bulk of the narco profits is not going to the insurgents. 150 million for the insurgents, 1.85 billion. To whom?
But these amounts were relatively insignificant compared with the vast sums that the West was pouring into the country. This republic, arguably the world's poorest country, received a massive injection of aid worth hundreds of billions of dollars, funding roads, public buildings, training and supplies. But the Afghan economy was no more than a bubble. Much of this money quickly left the country and found its way into the coffers of multinational companies and their subcontractors.
Vous pouvez avoir des sous-tables pour une attribution de marché que le ministre va toucher. Ce qui est beaucoup plus grave, c'est les 50% de ce contrat qui vont partir dans des sociétés qui ont des frais de gestion ou des frais d'administration qui sont tout à fait scandaleuses. Vous avez des gens qui ont dit, vous avez 100 à dépenser, dépensez-le rapidement parce qu'il faut nous montrer des résultats. Ils dépensaient 100 pour avoir 30 de résultats. Un petit barrage, une route, une école, et ces 30 leur suffisaient. Et puis bon, dans les rapports, on disait, voilà, on a dépensé 100 pour avoir ce résultat.
Stop blaming the Afghan capacity. It's poor planning, and donors were to be blamed for it. For example, a donor would spend or put in the budget $200 million for a project. They knew that it could be spent in 4 years, but dumping it all on the budget in the first year, because it's for some donors at the end of the day, showing back home, it's important to show how much money they dispersed.
Mais lorsque cette corruption a atteint le sommet de l'État, c'est là que les choses ont commencé à se dégrader sérieusement. Parce que lorsque les petits qui n'étaient pas vraiment corrompus réalisent que au sommet de l'échelle, la corruption est massive et on parle de sommes énormes, ils se sont dit, mais pourquoi pas nous dans ce cas-là? Et là, ça a gangréné tout le système et toute la pyramide.
As the Afghan government lost credibility, the Taliban gained ground. In their 30 years of existence, their strategy remained unchanged. In the early days, they filled the gaps left by the state. Then they won the support of the people by restoring order and religious law.
Our Justice Department was very accurate, even from the cities where government was there. People used to come to us for their problems because they believe that the Emirates judiciary will solve our problems without bribe, without wanting money.
سبب کامیابی و پیروزی امارات هم اتفاق و اتحادشان بود و به کلانایشان اعتماد داشتند. این مسئله قدرت و منصب به امارات ارزش نداره. شما شاهد صحنه هستین، یک وزیر میارن خود سوال میکنه، کسی نمیگه چرا اینو سوال کرده.
مخکې اومدم ټول دغه سیاسي بحث کوم دا بیا ذبیح الله مجاهد سره راغلو چې ستاسو ولې دا جهاد شروع کړ په کوم هغه مو شروع کړ الحمدلله د امارت مسؤلین یا د امارت مشرتابه چې دغه ټولو شیانو ته سره متوجه ده مثلا د اسلام د اصولو یا د شریعت د اصولو مطابق څومره اصول چې دي که نه دلته په عملي کېږي او مثلا موږ ته د دوی له طرفه هدایت پکې راځي د هغې ټول عملي کولو کې موږ پابند اوسو انشاءالله د شریعت او د اسلام د اصولو مطابق
اونا کجای کار را کرده میتونستن؟ اونا یک حکومتای به صلاحیت و یک حکومتای دست نشانده بود، اختیارشان به دست دیگه مردم بود. اونا هیچ چیز عملی کرده نتونستن.
...2009 was a bloody year for NATO troops. 512 were killed and more than 2,000 wounded. In the United States, the White House grew impatient, waiting for the military to deliver a winning strategy. General Stanley McChrystal, the man who personified the military effort, called for more troops.
General McChrystal, do you believe this is a winnable war in Afghanistan for ourselves and our Afghan allies?
Sir, I believe it is winnable, but I don't think it will be easily winnable.
The White House complied with the military's demands. This moment would go down in history as the surge, followed by a massive reinforcement of troops.
And as Commander-in-Chief, I have determined that it is in our vital national interest to send an additional 30,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.
There's an American phrase that when all you have is a hammer, the military, every problem looks like a nail that you should apply the hammer to.
In 2010, 120,000 Western soldiers, 90,000 of them American, were deployed in Afghanistan. The new buzzword was counterinsurgency, a strategy originally devised by a French army officer during the Algerian War. It was an old mantra: win the support of the people with tanks and guns.
It's a mindset change to understand that the population is really the prize, that you're trying to gain their support while at the same time inflict damage on the enemy. You've got to raise the cost. You've got to make it costly to step out of the line and join the insurgents.
The coalition forces increased their kill and capture nighttime raids, supposedly aimed at Taliban leaders. The cemeteries and prisons filled up.
دلته ورونو می خاطی کولې هغه راځم له خاطو څخه راغلی و اقتصاد له خو ډیر زوب ول دا منطقه خو ته معلومي ګوره شای نسته کې دلته او دلته ایلدارم و د کور کې نفوس مو زیات و نو واس مونږ رسیدای چې ورغلی وای چې غریبان و ډیر شي مونږ درلود اتی د شپې پاو کام یو بجاوه د یو ورور می ووتای دی باندې درې تیاری د غرب سر باندې کېنولې د تیاری چې کېناستې دوی چې را پیاده سوه دلته نورې تیاری ګرځې د جنګي هغو بمبار شروع کړی د غره سر صاحب څلور نفر باندې نیولی وم ویې پښې مې ماتې وې دواړې په کشولې وخېځولم هلته یې څاڅ کړم ذاتي بیا راته ویې وایي درې نفره مالته وویسته یو نفر مو دلته وویستی په دغه کاته لاغم کې دا زوی می بیا څلور ورځې پس پیدا سو له لغمه څخه یې راویستی
Events like these began to increase the perception in the eastern and southern regions of Afghanistan of the Western coalition being more of an occupying rather than a liberating force. In the eyes of Afghans, the drone war that was just beginning became a symbol of a Western monopoly on violence.
The Taliban had no air force, so it was safe for us. And so we relied heavily on air power, both manned aircraft, but also unmanned aircraft, drones. The challenge is that if you don't have contact on the ground and you don't well enough understand the local circumstances, you will make mistakes.
Okay. Okay, go and engage. Just be hunkering down. Go ahead. Okay, engage. What's up? Nice. secondaries.
Now it was droned, it was bombed, falsely bombed. My farmers getting killed in bombings, U.S. bombings.
Good. Fire. Very good. One more time. Quick. All right. Okay, go and engage.
One farmer whose two sons, whose legs got amputated, blown up, property. I had a 50 jirib of pomegranates, which is all burned now, it's ashes. I had grapes, 50 jiribs, which is all burned. So economically and spiritually, mentally, yes, everybody, every tree, every leaf, the air, the birds, everybody got affected. I went to my village a few days ago. I thought like all the trees were crying, all the leaves, you know.
The villagers fled where they could, depending on the military operations. Hundreds of thousands were displaced in their own country.
دغه تکلیفونه را به وړه به پراته وګوله ډوډۍ به نه خاشه به نه وه چې په پخه به کومو مینانو به جړله راته ته خو د بل وطن و د بل ځای و په کلي کې لا نه پرېښولو ټکې اوبه یې لا نه راکولې چې پر سر یې د کومو مینان پورته کړي تکلیفونه یې ورکول هزاره ولو یې وهله بیا
Ai, da, faci că ce cană tra.
Da, să văză pragăță, nu șcurută. Da, sahar غرمه سي غرمه کې سي المره وخه جلا ما نو کې رقم سي مګر چې تاریخ کې شپه کې مو چې پر خپل ملاس نسی د نه پسنګي د لاسه نو خپل عملونه به مو نو خپل د څه خبر غلې ده څه خبر نو خدای په خبر دی نو
آل باز ناتو آمده که جنگ علیه تروریسم میکنه وام 10 سال است که گرم و گرم است دران کندر است آخر گپ معلوم نیست والله بالله درد دارم و ترس دارم او مردم و ترس دارم که نشوا خدا نکرده که میرویس مجبور به خارج شوا و خارجی شوا نکنین با نیاز خدا
The outcry from the Afghan president was an appeal to Barack Obama to rethink the US strategy. For the first time, the White House began to consider negotiations, but the American administration was divided.
It became clear that the military solution that we were trying to put in place wasn't working. We needed to seek an alternative. But we had pushback from the Pentagon, from General Petraeus, and others who said it wasn't time to talk yet and that we needed to kill more Taliban and basically change the bargaining power between us before we would sit down with them.
The problem is that we never gained that dominant military position, right? During that surge, we largely denied ourselves. I believe we deluded ourselves to believe that there might be a military solution to this.
And the Taliban had this regenerative capacity, and they had sanctuary in Pakistan, so they could regenerate every year. There were more of them coming out, so we could continue to kill them, we could continue to fight them, but you know, they would keep coming back.
The Taliban brought guerrilla warfare into the towns and cities. Kabul became increasingly fortified, while foreigners locked themselves safely away. Nowhere was safe any of the time. After 10 years in Afghanistan, the American-led coalition had reached a dead end. There were record numbers of attacks and deaths in 2010 and 2011. No one could make sense of this war anymore, until the 2nd of May, 2011.
We're getting a closer look at the compound in Pakistan where Osama bin Laden was killed. ABC News obtained this exclusive video, purportedly taken inside the house where bin Laden was hiding. There's evidence of a bloody gunfight. The video shows bedrooms in disarray, blood on carpets, and items strewn about. The interior also appears
tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden, the leader of al-Qaeda, and a terrorist who's responsible for the murder of thousands of innocent men, women, and children. Justice has been done.
The US's public enemy number one had been hiding in neighboring Pakistan. Barack Obama had been waiting for this moment since he first became president.
We have turned a corner where we can begin to bring back some of our troops.
We had 100,000 American troops in Afghanistan. We had 40,000 additional NATO alliance troops. And this is the telling point. It was costing America, during those surge years, $120 billion a year. Per year.
Barack Obama set a 3-year deadline for withdrawal so that it wouldn't look like a defeat. France was among the first of the Allied nations to pull its troops out of active combat.
Il n'y a pas ici qu'une présence symbolique. Nous voulons que la France reste en Afghanistan, différemment du passé, parce que nous avons accompli la mission.
Il se trouve qu'au cours des années, c'est essentiellement du côté américain que les décisions se prenaient. Et que l'Alliance, elle a révélé ce qu'on en savait, c'est-à-dire c'est une organisation dont les principaux responsables sont, pas forcément des Américains, mais sont, disons, très liés aux Américains.
Si aucune troupe combattante ne restera en Afghanistan à partir de janvier 2013, il y aura toujours des formateurs qui accompagneront les cadres de l'armée afghane et la police.
The solution for the military withdrawal was clear. Make the Afghan security forces ready to take over in 2 years.
We expended enormous resources. I think the standard figure is something between $80 and $90 billion in building the Afghan security forces. We made several critical mistakes in doing that. One is that we built, to a large extent, an Afghan army that reflected our army. But it came so fast and it was so much that we squandered a lot of the money invested in the Afghan security forces. And finally, we poured a lot of resources into a system running from the Ministry of Defense down to the lowest private that reflected the endemic corruption of Afghan society.
2013 marked the beginning of a brutal wave of civilian casualties. 3,000 were killed that year alone. And just when they needed outside help more than ever, the roads became impassable and far too dangerous. Medical aid simply couldn't reach them.
La communauté humanitaire internationale ne voyageait que par avion. Certains de nos collègues afghans pouvaient avoir accès à certaines zones où il n'y avait pas de conflit, mais ça restait très compliqué. Ces populations, du coup, ont eu très peu accès et au développement et à l'aide humanitaire.
She said we don't know this searching blocking the boxes, breaking the windows and the doors. So what happened? If we know they were killing us, we would have protected you here. Whenever they were grabbing the children,
در سر میز عملیات خانه ما حتما روز 5 نفر 10 نفر حتما بود که دکتر صاحبای جراحی ما بیچاره مصروف بودن کار اونا رو میکردن. خوشبختانه ما اون مریضایی را که قبلا دسترسی نداشتن و بسیار دلی میکردن یا در تأخیر یا موتر نبود یا جنگ بود یا هر موضوعی که بود سبب میشد.
ورور مو چې مړ سو پلار مو مړ سو دا یوه مور پاته وه موږ ډېر سرخوشحاله وو نو بس دا موږ ته یو غر غوندې وه بیا مین راباندې پټه سو بیا هغه موټر کې زموږ یوه خور هم وه زما کوچنک بچی هم و زما مور هم وه نو بیا مې مور هغه زوی وفات وکړ شهیدان سوله 28 کسه نور پکې شهیدان سوله نو زه و زما خور خدای پاک بچ کړلو خو بیا موږ لس لږ سره زخمونه وه بیا د شپې 12 بجې وې څوک نه وه نه طالبان وه نه عسکر وه نه امبولانس و هېڅ شی نه و رش ځای باندې به و چې هلته به دوی انفجار وکړي یا بیا ځانمرګ پټاو کړي یا بیا موټرسایکل درولو چاچ کړی بیا یا بیا موټر بم وکړي هغه کې به ډېر بېګناه انسانان وژل کېدله چې هغه نه په حکومت کې لاس درلود نه په طالب کې
Il y a eu tellement de victimes civiles que la rancœur n'a fait qu'augmenter entre ruraux et citadins. Je réalisais quand même qu'à Kaboul, on vivait dans une bulle et qu'on était vraiment loin de la réalité des 3/4 de la population afghane.
فیلم
میگیرن. سریسته خوب شد. I'm very serious and beauty. 10 سال میشه که ما به کابل آمدیم، اینجا زندگی میکنیم، به خاطر ادامه تحصیلات اینجا آمده بودیم. فامیل ما یک فامیل معلم یا باسواد است، مثل که پدرم شاعر است، خواهرای من هر کدامش تحصیل کرده هستند و خوشبختانه فامیل شوهرم هم آدمای روشن فکر بود. بعد از ازدواج ما به تحصیل ادامه دادیم. یعنی من صاحب یک دختر بودم که با دانشگاه رفتم. صاحب یک دختر بودم، دخترم 6 ماه بود. من شامل دانشگاه کاردان شدم در بخش حقوق و علوم سیاسی.
But violence crept into every corner of Afghan society. As well as poverty and armed attacks, there was a surge in crime. Violent crime spread to all major Afghan cities.
Il y avait eu une montée des kidnappings. Ça m'a beaucoup inquiétée parce qu'on disait que personne n'était à l'abri, que même les femmes et les enfants étaient kidnappés. C'était aussi compliqué car c'était une période où beaucoup d'investisseurs privés venaient investir dans des usines, des ateliers, dans de la production et ça a beaucoup ralenti justement cet élan-là.
با 1000 افغانی پول تو را قتل میکردن. 1000 افغانی اگر پیدا میکردن یا یک تلفنی نوکیای ساده 500 افغانیگی تو را وادار به مرگ میکردن که تلفن تبته و پول تبته. بعد از او خوشبخت میبودی که بدون از اینکه لط و کوبت کنن تو را رها میکردن. این خو همش از فقر میآید، همگیش از نبود وظیفه، نبود امکانات میآید. چون ما خو گفتیم مسلمان هستیم و دزدی در اسلام حرام کامل است. و یکی چرا خدمات راه نمیشد که اون نفر مجبور به دزدی کردن 1000 افغانی میشد دیگه. این جوابش باید حاکمان اونمو دوره بدن.
The presidential election took place in April and May 2014. The Afghan population had grown from 20 to 33 million. A new generation was emerging, middle class, urban and educated, the NATO generation, hungry for change.
ما جوان شدیم و از خواستگاه شهروندی خود برخواستیم و فکر کردیم که ما هم شهروند هستیم، میتونیم در رقم خوردن سیاست کشورمان رول بازی کنیم. یک رأی ما سرنوشت ساز است. ما از درون فامیل تشویق میشدیم که باید برای دادن بروین، به پای صندوق های رأی بروین تا سرنوشت کشور شما به دست شما رقم بخوره.
Hamid Karzai was not eligible to stand, and former finance minister Ashraf Ghani was elected the new president. He was a technocrat, educated in the US, and wanted to reform the state. But his election was marred by fraud on an unprecedented scale. Ashraf Ghani's main opponent, Abdullah Abdullah, refused to accept the result.
It required months of United States effort. I was spending a lot of time that summer in Afghanistan trying to help Ghani and Abdullah negotiate the outcome of those elections, and because neither side was willing to concede.
I'm here because President Obama and the United States of America are deeply interested in a unified, democratic, and stable Afghanistan. We obviously have high hopes that the questions about the election will be resolved quickly, can be resolved.
Ultimately, we forged, thanks to the efforts of Secretary John Kerry, a government of national unity that we hoped would be able to manage the country and keep this democratic experiment moving forward.
انتخابات چې نړۍ پې وخندل د ریاست جمهوري نه د کودکستان هغه جوړه کړله لیکن موږ ګورو چې موږ څونه مخته ځو بیا راخویږو لکه د یو مثال درکړم چې په غره خیږي چې واوره وي که 10 متره ځې 15 متره بیرته راخوایږي افغانستان هم دغه حالت کې دی اوس
وقتی که ما فهمیدیم که دیگر رأی ما سرنوشت ساز نیست حداقل شخصا خودم دیگر پای صندوق رأی نرفتم ما امو مسئولیت به شانه خود نگرفتم چون دیگه کسا سرنوشت کشوری مرا رقم می زدن من دیگر رأی ندادم و ایره امروز من میگم خوشبخت هستم که انتخاب نکردم
We knew like the president's inner circle, none of them, their family didn't live here. They had no connection to this country, unfortunately. We all felt that these people will run away. Years ago, I said it's like two plain people who came from outside who are ruling the country, and these two planes would be ready before the country falls.
As would later become clear, the US government had already worked out that their military withdrawal would lead to the collapse of the Afghan state. So the Americans had changed their strategy and finally decided to negotiate with the Taliban. 4 years of discreet talks culminated in 2014 with the release of the only American soldier held by the Taliban.
There had been a package put together that was going to lead to opening the talks, which had a prisoner exchange element to it. 5 Taliban in Guantanamo and Boberg jail. This guy's been, you know, in a cage for several years. Let's do it. So we negotiated it.
An important component of the negotiations was not simply about the swap of these 5 people for Boberg, but a test of the sincerity and the ability of the Taliban to deliver on commitments they made to us.
These negotiations were not without controversy. In 2014, the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, established a presence in Afghanistan. They brought with them the same brutal violence they'd unleashed in Iraq and Syria. ISIL was as much the enemy of the Taliban as they were of the Americans.
The intelligence community said that they thought they were going to be a real threat. Now, they didn't say what scale. I mean, they didn't know, obviously. But they took it seriously once they appeared. And that became, I think, that gave them a rationale for revisiting Obama's decision to leave in 2016.
I can't see anything!
Barack Obama left office in 2017 without ending the war. To compensate for the withdrawal of troops, the US military increased its use of drones, controlled from a base in Nevada. In just 2 years, these drone strikes increased tenfold. For every so-called target killed, another 9 people died. These remote-controlled aerial attacks simply strengthened the resolve of a new generation of Afghans who joined the ranks of the Taliban.
پټ راغلم مور ډیره خفه وه له زما ورور واتساپ
بیا په ویډیو کال باندې غږېدو سره نو ویل چې ځان سره احتیاط کوه او پلار هم چې وي هغه به راته ویلې چې یعنې زه هم نه منې کومه لکه دا د ازادۍ جګړه ده او دا د اسلام جګړه ده نو که په دې لار کې تاسې ووژل شئ که تاسې مثلا بندیان شئ که تاسې زخمیان شئ دا باندې زه ویاړ او افتخار کوم.
I was ready to go and take AK-47 to fight, to make our country free. Then I was ordered that, no, here we have a lot of people with guns. We need you guys in the cities. And I became a lecturer at Kandahar University. Beside that, I was, we were giving our message to our people, understanding them that who are foreigners, what they want to do, and whose country is it, and at the end of the day, who will stay.
موږ خو اکثریت مسؤلیت د فرهنګي برخه کې موږ فعالیت کوو مثلا ذهن جوړونه کې موږ دې کې شک نشته په سوشل میډیا کې به موږ هغه کوو فعالیت کوو فیسبوک کې مثلا ما 2-3 پیجونه صفحې وي په ټویټر کې وي مثلا په انسټاګرام کې او حتی په ټیک ټاک کې او کلب هاوس کې به بحثونه کول دا ټول زموږ د هغه برخه وه.
These things didn't happen without a system. You know, had about 10 to 12 commissions, and every commission was like a ministry. At the end of the 2018 and 19, we have millions of income, you know, incomes, daily incomes. We have our customs, what there's. For every province, we have a governor. For every district, we have in charge.
Today, the Taliban has emerged from the shadows where it operated during the war. It's in government. Its fighters have replaced the policemen they once fought against. Taliban personnel now occupy the corridors of power. In these government buildings in Kabul, some civil servants from the previous regime have remained, like Aimal Jamal. They now work alongside the Taliban, who for many years were their sworn enemies.
اوج رویداد اینجا در وزارت فواید عامه صورت گرفت. مهاجمان هر آن که را دیدند به گلوله بستند.
او ما دون از نږدې فرق پکې وکړه لکه 15 متره فرق د موږ وسوش د هغوی راننوتل او زه مخې ته ورته ولاړ او زه وتښتېدم او زه پکې بند سوم تقریبا 8 ساعته زه په جنګ کې بند وم. دا د ما غټه خاطره ده چې تقریبا موږ 8 کاران چې نږدې همکاران مو پکې شهیدان شول پکې د منځه لاړل.
The final years of the old Ashraf Ghani regime had been chaotic. Alongside the escalating Taliban offensive, attacks by ISIL further destabilized the country.
It was only in the end of 2018 when the Trump administration decided, you know what, we will sit with the Taliban. They only want to talk to us. They don't want to talk to President Ghani. So we will sit with them to see if we can come up with some sort of deal that will allow us to leave and ensure that our interests on counterterrorism and other things are met.
The agreement for bringing peace to Afghanistan, also known as the United States Taliban deal, or the Doha Accord, was signed in the Qatari capital on the 29th of February 2020. For the Americans, it was a case of every man for himself. Afghanistan was now left to get on with it, including those who'd once believed in the promise of Western development.
The U.S. strategy to deal with the Taliban, to engage with them, with leaving out the government, was a big setback. And the overall mood in the air was that U.S. has made a deal with Taliban, why are you fighting? You know, and this really caused a lot of morale issues.
تسلیم سا الحمدلله الحمدلله درځي څو کسه جته شمار کوي لاربکان دی ورته وګوره دا ملي اردو تسلیمیږي د اسلامي په حالات کې دی الحمدلله.
This is video of the Afghan army handing over its weapons to the new Taliban government.
Il y avait beaucoup de gens à Kaboul, et en particulier beaucoup d'Afghans qui ne voulaient pas y croire. Je pense que c'est ça le terme, ils ne voulaient pas y croire. Et donc il y avait une espèce de déni généralisé. Et puis quelque part, c'était aussi pour la communauté internationale une certaine forme d'échec.
Today's headline, we are witnessing more cities in Afghanistan falling to the Taliban. 3 more provincial capitals and a local army headquarters in the country's northeast.
In recent days, the Taliban have captured huge chunks of territory, including many of the country's largest and most important cities.
Progression éclair en Afghanistan, un pas de plus vers la prise de pouvoir des talibans aux portes de Kaboul, les islamistes.
Le drapeau américain a été retiré de l'ambassade. Le président Ashraf Ghani a fui au Tadjikistan et déclaré les talibans ont gagné.
Regardless of the spin put on events by Western media, when the Taliban took over this presidential palace in August 2021, they still held a door open to the possibility of peace.
وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Many Afghans were simply relieved that 40 years of war had finally come to an end.
و په زړه کې مې داسې خوشحالي وه چې خدای په مو خپل وطن را ازاده کړي، خپل هدیرې ته به ولاړ شو. موږ ویل دا موږ چې ژوندي دا خو به دا خپل هدیرې ته ولاړ شو، دا زموږ مناسب خوندي سي ویال به هم په ګوله موړ شو. خوشحاله وو، موږ ویل خدای به اسلامي کړي، خدای به کراري کړي.
The Islamic Republic of Afghanistan was at an end. The Taliban called their new regime the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. It was built on the rubble of Western intervention. What remained was a country at a standstill, a land in ruins.
When we came here, all the funds of foreigners stopped, and nothing was here in our budget. Just numbers on the papers and names. So we it was like starting from zero.
وش دنیا وال خپل دا خبره کوي چې 1 میلیون خلک د وګړي سره د ولګي سره د مرګ سره مخ دي. مطلب دغه چا کړي څوک یې مخ کوي ورسره. خلکو یو غړپ اوبه یو لقمه ډوډۍ یو مړۍ ډوډۍ هم په قرار په امنیت کې نه وه خوړلې. د اوښو سره د وینو سره یې ګډه خوړلې وه. الحمدلله لله الحمد نن که یو مایع ډوډۍ خوري الحمدلله د امنیت په فضا کې خوري.
The Taliban are now firmly in government. They impose a strict interpretation of law and order. Women have to be fully covered in public at all times, though some have defied this new law. The Taliban government has also banned girls and women from education beyond 6th grade, from many forms of employment and from public life. Meanwhile, the Taliban must address the wider task of healing the wounds and deep divisions left by the war.
طالبی که میای مستقر میشه باز عفوی عمومی اعلان میکنه، میگه ما عفوی عمومی کرده. یعنی ای که مردم افغانستان آیا این انتحاری را کرده بود؟ مردم عادی، مردم غیر نظامی در سرکا انتحاری میکرد. اگر کسی که عفوی عمومی باید اعلان کنه مردم افغانستان است.
بل ټول عمر چې موږ دغه سوي طالب مین پټ کړی دی، سړک یې خراب کړی، کلینیک یې وران کړی دی، نو زما هیڅ د دې سره علاقه نشته. موږ خو چې دې معنا کار وکړي، خدمت وکړي وطن ته، موږ خو بخښو، موږ کوم دغه نه ورسره لرو.
پیدا سوی یم په جنګ کې یم او کیدای شي مړ شم، کیدای شي ما کیدای شي پکې استفاده کړله. توقعات پکې شته، دا نه یو چې باید هغه اوس نه دا به جنګونه روان وي، خو مونږ هم په دې توقع لرو چې په مونږ باندې به هم رحم وشي.